Well, hello, awesome students. Dr. J here. And as promised, I'm going to do a special little presentation I call the ABCs of presentations. As I know a number of students are creating presentations this week, or you're all creating presentations this week, I should say. Hopefully you're all creating them, but nonetheless, I know some students might be a little bit stronger than others. Now, here's a couple of things that I want to keep in mind. This is a presentation that I built specifically to give people kind of a crash course coaching session into how to develop effective PowerPoint presentations, but it's also a presentation that I built specifically to kind of talk about some of the nuances. So some of what I'm going to be doing is presenting the information. Some of what I'm going to be doing is coaching you through the hows and whys of things that I do on particular slides, how I'll connect with the audience and so forth. I'm actually going to turn the camera off for the bulk of my presentation. I just wanted to do a quick introduction, but again, stress the importance of for your submission this week as we talk about some of these things. We talk about storytelling, for example, and building your effective PowerPoint presentation. This is the time when you want to bring it, okay? In a lot of classes, you might build a series of PowerPoint slides. I teach some classes and I always tell students I'm not necessarily grading some things in terms of what it looks like, but grading more in terms of the content. This time we're grading more in terms of what it looks like. So please keep that in mind as you're developing your PowerPoint presentations and developing your story this week. So if you're ready, here we go with the ABCs of presentations. So as I dive into the presentation today, one of the first things that I want to stress to you all as you're developing a presentation for this or really any time is I always encourage students to storyboard, create an outline of your presentation. Now, if you've ever created an outline for a paper, an outline for a presentation is pretty much the same thing. You have those subtopics that you're going to talk about throughout your paper. Think of each one of those subtopics as being a slide. So that is one of the first things that you want to keep in mind when you're developing a presentation. There's three key areas within your presentation: content, design, and delivery, thus the ABCs. And so these things are equally important. It's important that you have good content. It's important that it looks appealing to your audience. And it is important that you deliver your content in an effective, authoritative manner. So please keep this in mind, gang, as I see a lot of times students will put or they'll turn in a submission that clearly they've spent a lot of time on, but they have different fonts throughout and their margins are out of alignment. Maybe they have a cover page with some errors or their references aren't quite right. I always want you to think in terms of in the IO world, you're going to be doing an assessment and then delivering back something along these lines to really sell your services, sell your ideas, sell your product, or whatever the case might be back to your client. And if your presentation doesn't look that great or your delivery is not all that good, and certainly you didn't know what you were talking about in terms of content, it is unlikely you're going to get the job. So keep that in mind. So let's first talk about content. What do you want to say? What's in your presentation? Always think in terms of when we're developing our presentations, there's probably a lot of information that we've gathered. We've gone out and we've assessed what's going on in a client's company, for example, and you've developed a 10-page report on all the key information, all the statistics, all the ups and downs of what you see. But are you really going to put all that information in your presentation? Not likely. And the reason for that is you're going to overwhelm your audience. So always need to think in terms of the information that goes into your presentation is really going to be that expertise, the sweet spot. You know a lot of information, your client wants to know a lot of information, but honestly, they're only going to have an attention span that's going to be capable of really kind of tracking maybe about three main ideas that you're going to present back to them. Now, want you to keep in mind as I'm presenting today, threes. Think of the power of threes. You're going to see that theme presented over and over in terms of my presentation. And again, that's about the most that they're going to be able to sit through and tolerate and retain as they go out of your presentation. I want you to think always in terms of how you can truncate your message. If you can't write your message in a sentence, you can't say it in an hour. So if you can't summarize your information into a bullet point or maybe 3 bullet points, you're going to have a difficult time connecting with your audience. They're going to go to sleep, they're going to be overwhelmed, and they're not going to get the information that you're trying to convey to them. Now, this is an important one this week because we're talking about storytelling. And if you recall, there is an article that talks about the neuroscience behind storytelling, and it is based around emotions. And anytime we can get individuals to connect with emotions, we're generally going to have a better opportunity to get them to buy into our information. They're going to be riveted right on the edge of their seat, like waiting for you to say something really compelling and exciting because you've captured their emotions. Okay, so the key strategy is you always want to connect to them in a way that's going to evoke some type of emotional response, something that they can connect to. But always keep in mind that your structure is going to determine the flow of your presentation. Again, as I talked about, think in terms of the power of 3. We have a solid introduction, which is going to be, hey, here's who I am, here's my background, here's my information. By the way, my name is Dr. Jeremy Colvin. I've been a clinical psychologist for, well, a number of years. I actually went back to school starting in 2000, and I spent 10 years as a full-time student in a live classroom, I might add, working a full-time job. So gang, I've been there before. I know exactly what you're talking about. And what I'm going to present to you today is some key informations, some basics, and the ABCs of presentations. Okay? There's a solid introduction for you. Now you might go on for a little bit longer. And one of the things you always want to keep in mind is maybe you're going to present for 10 minutes. Your introduction's probably going to be very short, but telling them a quick joke or some little insight about your background is very helpful. The body of your presentation is critically important, and as I mentioned earlier, apply the rule of 3. I'm going to present 3 things to you today, or there's 3 key pieces of information I want you to remember from this presentation. Or as you summarize at the end, remember these 3 key facts, okay? And notice how I do and set up my slides, how I present the information rather, and I set up my slides is 3 key things on my slides. Now, it's not to say you're not going to have more things, or you're not going to have 4 bullet points or 5 bullet points, but a lot of times if you focus on the power of 3, it's going to be a more impactful message to your clients. Finally, as we talk about the introduction, the body, and the conclusion or the closing, this is where you're going to have some type of solution, an insight, an action step. As you get done with the summation of your presentation, you're going to say, here's what we're doing next. Okay, so always keep in mind you're leading them down a path. Certainly going to answer their questions at the end, and then you're going to provide an action step or the next step to what you're going to be doing in your project. Now, transitions are really, really important, and it's going to make it easier for your audience to embrace your ideas, connecting with that information. So always think in terms of connecting, contrasting, and concluding. We're transitioning from one thought to the next, okay? And it's important that you're building in such a way that you're able to transition effectively from one topic to the next, because again, you're going to present the information back to your clients in probably like a 10-minute, 15-minute pitch. Now, it is quite possible that the reason that you're there is to do longer trainings or longer sessions, seminars, or something along that line with your clients. But keep in mind that generally you want to think in terms of being able to present your information in a succinct manner, transitioning from one topic to the next quite easily. And speaking of transitions, let's talk about design, because content is absolutely king. It's the most important thing that you're going to have when you're presenting it back. Gang, as I always tell you in the feedback, as I said, it's really important that you add research because we're validating our arguments. We're creating that solid content. But the way that you present your information is just as important, because if your information is not presented well, they're not going to pay attention to it and you're going to lose credibility. So you don't have to start with a blank slide. Now, I've been doing this exact same presentation for a number of years. I've presented it to literally thousands of students. I've presented it to clients. I've coached with individuals. I've coached teams on developing PowerPoint presentations, and this is sometimes what I start with. So this is something I'm quite familiar with. But in today's world, when we're developing presentations, starting with a blank slide is just foolish because there's so many tools and resources available. I've been building PowerPoint presentations literally for over 25 years. Once upon a time, we did actually start with more or less a blank slide, but generally speaking, today I never start with blank slides. I usually start with some type of template, either a custom design template, or I tweak and custom design it myself, but I use those templates. I use good stock photos and I add some customization to it to refine and build something that's specific to that company. Often I brand it, etc. Keep all my colors the same, but you always want to think in terms of the information that you're putting out to your client. So on the left-hand side of the screen, if you see that information there, we're talking about Google Slide features. Now, don't pay too much attention to the actual content on the slide. It's more about a lot of information that you're throwing out into individuals. So we've really got three main things that we want to convey to our client. And we have the information here on the left-hand side, but a more effective way to present the exact same information is what you see on the right-hand side. Remember, you're talking about a lot of information. Gang, I'm giving you a lot of key information here to really help you develop solid presentations. But I want you to keep in mind, not every word I'm saying is on the slide, right? So when you're developing your bullet points, always think in terms of condensing your information down into putting a key point, and use some images and graphics to enhance your message as opposed to a lot of text. Be consistent in your styling. Minimalist, cartoonish, corporate, stylish. Okay, so just some different categories that I put in here in terms of how I design my presentations. Sometimes I use high def, very colorful, elaborate photos within my presentations. Sometimes I have stick figures. Sometimes I have cartoons. You can see in this presentation, I have more of the cartoonish effect in my presentation, but I'm always consistent with what I'm doing because this is going to help to facilitate better understanding of your information. Clients are going to remember what you're talking about if it looks like your presentation is really solid and put together very well. Always keep in mind, use those templates, use those themes, use those colors, and stick with them. I talk heavily about utilizing PowerPoint. Students should always use PowerPoint, especially in the beginning when they're developing their presentations. And the reason for this is because the designers who make these templates know what they're doing, gang. So start with using some of the basic templates in PowerPoint. There are certainly a number of templates that you can add to PowerPoint, but often they have pre-designed fonts, font sizes, colors, etc. A lot of times you can change that palette and adjust some things well, but stick with the basics. It will serve you more. You might adjust your font size here and there. You might change a color if you want to emphasize a word. But if you stick with the basics and you go with what's built in there, what designers have actually put into those templates, you're going to find that your presentations are not only easier to make, they're going to be a lot more effective. Contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. I want you all to look at this slide carefully. What you may or may not have noticed thus far is this slide is built from the middle. It's very intentionally built from the middle, and you can see all of these items in there are in alignment. They are all spaced out exact same distance from one another. Notice that at the bottom, it says tip number 5. That means I'm getting to the end of the pink section as I move on. Everything is color coded. So when you have all these design elements in the proper place, you're going to find that your clients, again, are going to be more attracted to your information, more receptive to what you're saying. You're going to look like more of an authority. Even sometimes when you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to help to reinforce your message no matter what. So be consistent in how you're presenting your information back. Now, let's talk about the last part, is the delivery. And one of the things I want to stress is, and some of you right now might be thinking, well, we're not actually delivering the message. Well, you sort of are, because you're going to sketch out that story. You're going to be describing the story or putting it in text, essentially creating a script. And so you want to think about the words that you're going to say. And when you're doing it, I want you to envision yourself saying those words. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What types of things would you say? Gang, this is some real facts. Why TED Talks are always so good is because those guys practice hundreds of times. But you can imagine, if you had a very popular TED Talk that was going to be viewed 23 million times, wouldn't you think it would be important to practice it a few times before you deliver that TED Talk? Now, as I said, I've done this presentation literally hundreds of times, but every presentation that I put together, even if I'm presenting it for the first time, I've already given that presentation 10, 15, 20 times. Because as I'm building a slide, as I'm putting my content together, I am envisioning myself, I'm walking through exactly what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, what the delivery is going to be, what the timing is going to be in terms of the text, the transitions, and everything about that. So I am practicing constantly before I deliver my message. Often I can build a really elaborate PowerPoint presentation pretty quickly, I might add, and deliver that presentation in a few days as if I've done it over and over again, even though it might be the first time I've done it. Now, if I'm doing something rather big, of course, I do practice it quite often. This presentation, incidentally, I don't think I've done for quite some time now. So this is the first time I've done it in quite a while. But again, it's something I'm very familiar with. So always keep in mind, it's important to do this. You guys can't see me right now, but I generally have a smile when I talk. I always stand up when I'm presenting. So even though you can't see me right now, I'm standing, and I'm standing very tall, and I have a firm voice. I obviously have appropriate clothing on. Students will always see me in a shirt and tie. I always present the same image over and over again because it helps to improve my confidence, which improves my credibility. So always keep this in mind when you're presenting back, even if you're not in a room and they can't see you at all, the facial expressions will be heard in your words, in your tone. So keep that in mind as you're presenting, even if you're off camera. Put a little bit of humor out there. It's great to entertain people. It's great to help put them at ease. If you notice, my presentation style often is very casual. I tend to jump into things. Often I talk very quickly. I know this, but I want you to build a connection with me through my words, through my easy sense of get to know you kind of attitude, as opposed to somebody who's really stiff and distant and detached, but telling small jokes, talking about the industry, the company. I'll often find out the names of some of the key players and make a couple little, appropriately humorous remarks. Always keep in mind your audience, be very appropriate, be, kind of G-rated with everything you talk about is a good rule of thumb, but it's helping to put your audience at ease, and so they're more engaged with your content. Now, spontaneity is really good, and it conveys some honesty. So ironically, right now, as I said, I haven't done this presentation in quite some time. And one thing is you're probably not aware of so much as you're going to be watching it in a video is this is pretty much a one-take presentation for me. I'm not doing this over and over again, correcting myself and pulling out the stumbles and the edits that I've had along the way. But again, guys, I'm really well practiced and polished in terms of my presentation style, so this is quite easy for me. What you also can't see right now, as I just realized, is you can't see my hand gestures. I talk a lot and make a lot of gestures when I'm presenting as well, which also helps to reinforce your message. And now that I think about it, I should add that to this presentation. One last thing I want to talk about is as you wrap up your presentation, you always want to give your audience an opportunity to ask questions and reinforce the important elements of your message. Talk about those 3 most important things that you want to address. And if you're in a situation where there is going to be questions, it's always a good idea to anticipate what questions might come up. That is critically important. I can tell you one of the most stressful presentations I've ever done is defending my clinical research project. So imagine going to graduate school to earn your doctoral degree, and at the end of the process, you got to sit in front of 3 PhD level psychologists. That was my case. And you have to present your research, in which case I had a 300+ page paper that I spent a couple years doing research on. And I actually physically had to stand up in a room and give a presentation back on the information. And I anticipated dozens of questions that might come up. And by the way, they did grill me with questions for probably about 90 minutes. And so think in terms of that kind of stuff can happen when you give presentations. So always be prepared with some information that you're going to get. Take a moment, restate the question, make sure you heard it correctly, and that gives you an opportunity to address it in a way that's most helpful. So with that, that is the ABCs of presentations. I hope this little quick jump into and go presentation will help you, give you some ideas in developing some presentation, give you some direction in terms of storytelling and some of the aspects of the hows and whys of developing presentations. If I can be of any support or assistance, don't hesitate to reach out, gang. I'm looking forward to seeing your presentations this week. Put some of these tips into that and see the magic happen. I look forward to seeing your stuff, gang. Have a great week.